for the children of our children, keep the circle whole. And I want to take a minute to share some wisdom that I and some of your members of the board and leadership team received from a ministry startup we did a weekend or two ago. Time is odd. Are we hearing okay? Yeah. Okay. And that is that sometimes when we hear a child in worship service, we can just think how beautiful and important it is that the newest generations and the future of our faith are feeling safe enough in this space to be fully present. Amen, right? May we be building a space together through worship where we can all feel so fully present, to be ourselves, to be whole, to share fully of ourselves. All right, just had to say that, and it fits because this Sunday is our first service in the theme of love, after we talked about justice in January. Now, this whole fall and winter, as we have been beginning our shared ministry together, we have been focused particularly on this fellowship, its history, present, and hope for future, as well as Unitarian Universalism. In all of these threads throughout our themes, we focused on building relationship and community because, we're starting a new ministry together. Now, this week, we turn to a way of being in relationship together. As community and through friendship too, we turn to a particular way of love and loving that, great news, you all already know how to do, right? And that we can grow upon and expand upon together. Now, this particular way of loving brings us in earthly salvation that we find and create together. Now, this concept and our understanding of it today will deconstruct the world's salvation, don't worry. But this concept and our understanding of it today is from Dr. Rita Nakashima-Brock and Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker in their 2001 book titled Proverbs of Ashes. Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker is a theologian, former professor, and former parish minister. She's also a prolific writer of readings and liturgy, and we've heard many of them together in this space. She also wrote the words to the sung prayer response that we use during our meditation and prayer time today and will be using for the month of February. Parker was the former president of Star King School for the Ministry, the Unitarian Universalist Seminary in Berkeley, California. And she is dually ordained in the Unitarian Universalist and United Methodist traditions and is an older white woman. Dr. Rita Nakashima-Brock is also a theologian and a former professor, as well as a former chaplain. She is the author of Recovering from Moral Injury After War, and is one of the foremost experts on moral injury. Quick side note to say that this term moral injury was originally used to describe the moral harm imposed upon combat veterans from their service. Now, Brock has also helped many of us understand the moral injury that most of us incurred as a result of living through the global pandemic. If you're like, I want to learn more about this and are looking for resources to understand moral injury as a vet or as someone whose faith in humanity and perhaps in yourself was affected by the pandemic or other events, I'd highly recommend you look into Brock's work, and we'll be sending out some links in Friday's newsletter if you want to learn more. Okay, back more specifically to the topic at hand. It's really great work, so I had to mention it to y'all. Dr. Brock is a commissioned minister in the Disciples of Christ Church and is an older Japanese American woman. Dr. Brock and Doctors Brock and Parker have been friends for quite some time, and they wrote 3 books together, this being their first. Now, the full title of this book is Proverbs of Ashes, Violence, Redemptive Suffering, and the Search for What Saves Us. In this book, they discuss how suffering as a requirement for salvation, suffering as a requirement for salvation, has been so harmful in Christianity and in our wider American culture. They reflect on this as theologians and as people. In fact, their theological approach requires they bring their whole selves and stories, their humanity, into their theology. And so they reflect upon the violence they've experienced, Brock upon racialized violence and Parker upon sexualized violence. Then they share from this personal and theological healing work that they have done, the work they have done to heal from this violence and create a new kind of life and a new theology. Now, the very act of working on this book together, of sharing their heartbreaking and spirit-saving stories with one another, led them into their new theology of salvation that we heard described in our reading, that we are saved by community, particularly by the love of steady witness that exists in community and can make space for mourning, for healing, and for love. In their own words now, they say, friendship made this book possible. Our friendship with each other and the significant friendships of our lives that we recount in this book. It is inconceivable to us that either of us could have written our stories without the support, the encouragement, the companionship, and the hearing into words of the other. They go on to say the emotional task would have defeated us working alone if either of us had possessed the courage to begin it. And that makes this project of inestimable value to us. The realization that our friendship has deepened, that in the writing of this book, we have lived the new theology we hope for and have arrived at a theology neither of us could have conceived alone. Grace has come to us in unexpected ways. In the midst of life, we have known healing, courage, restored love, salvation. Parker and Brock, in this writing of this book, were able to be that steady witness for one another, to hear one another's stories of pain and of healing, to create spaces of more love and healing together. For this is how salvation, as they construct it, begins, by steady witness, with gaze that is steady, to not hide our eyes, to not offer trite platitudes, but to truly be with and sit with one another. They go on to say that salvation also requires love, the sort of love that we create when we are steady witnesses for one another. Healing love, patient love. And Brock's and Parker, Doctors Brock and Parker, they provided this to one another too, in friendship. That ever-present, brave love that opened the way to being saved from violence and suffering and arriving at a new life of love. Now, we're talking about salvation here, which is a word some of us might feel uncomfortable with, and is a word laden with many connotations. So I'm gonna take a sip of water and we're gonna talk about it, and I think it'll be less scary. So in the context of our work today, we say that salvation is found in community and sin in separation. Salvation in community, sin in separation. Now, these are maybe different than you've heard descriptions and definitions of familiar concepts. Sin in popular context often has come to mean acts that are defined as not good or right. Correct? Yeah. Many Christian theologians, however, from the Orthodox to the very progressive, agree that sin means separation. So an act that is bad or a reality that is bad is labeled as a sin because it is one that separates. Now, to speak to us in our own theological language, we'll turn to Paul Tillich, a theologian who's in this very, very progressive category. Tillich writes, "Sin is separation. To be in the state of sin is to be in the state of separation, and separation is threefold. There is separation among individual lives between each other, separation of a man or person from themselves, and separation of all people from the ground of being." I forgot my fingers on that one. There's separation between individual lives, separation of a person from themselves, and separation from all people from the grounds of being. Now, this ground of being is Tillich's name for the ultimate, whether divine or not. We know that all oppressions are sins. They attempt to separate people from the very ground of our being, from the divine, from one another, and from ourselves. Now, violence is a sin for the same reason, right? For the separation that it creates. This all is kind of making sense, this concept of sin and separation? Okay, all right. We're not lost, beautiful. Okay, now this also brings us to our working definition of salvation, right? Salvation is then our reuniting, our reunification with the ground of our being, whether divine or not, our reunification with one another, and our reunification with ourselves. In a world that is always creating separation and pulling us apart, when we talk about salvation this morning, we are talking about a reunification, a being made whole again with ourselves, with one another, and with our world. Make sense? Yeah, okay. So salvation then is a continual process. We're always becoming more saved or more reunited with ourselves, who we are, and who we are in community. All right, we've got the concepts down. So how can this salvation happen? How can it happen here in community? For this, we turn back to Doctors Brock and Parker. They write, you're going to recognize these words, but they're important, so we're going to hear them again. Salvation begins with the courage of witness whose gaze is steady. Steady witnesses neither flee in horror to hide their eyes, nor console with sweet words. Steady witnesses end the hidden life of violence by bringing it to public attention. They help to restore souls fragmented. They accompany the journey to healing. End quote. Salvation begins with the courage of witnesses whose gaze is steady, who do not use trite platitudes, with those who are next to us week in and week out, holding our joys and our sorrows in love. For this is the work of religious community, right? This is the work of this fellowship. It is in this act of sharing, both those of us who share and those of us who hear or witness, that both are reuniting with themselves, with ourselves, and with our connection with others, right? In the sharing and the listening of the stories, we are being reunited, we are being made more whole, connecting to parts of ourselves that we felt could not be shared, connecting to parts of others that we never would have connected with before. And when we share and listen, we are creating the space for others to do the same, creating the healing space for others to move to this reunification. This creates the space for that real love, that healing love. So, we know that we can already do this, and we might wonder, what are some of the other ways we need to be in community together if we long to create this reunification? We'll go back to Doctors Brock and Parker for one final tip. They write, we have experienced life-giving communities that foster knowledge of spirit, awareness of presence. We know that at their best, communities practice the right use of the powers of life and lead people to experience wholeness, right relationship, and beauty. When this happens, such communities teach us to know ourselves and the world as sacred and sustain an ethic of appreciative care for life. End quote. Communities teach us again and again how to say yes to life and how to care for life. They teach us how to love, how to be in right relationship, in wholeness, and in beauty. They create the spaces for us to heal, to be healed by steady witnesses, to be reunited and made whole. Now, our challenge, the challenge of this community, is to continue to center these experiences of steady witness, of right relationship, wholeness, and beauty, even when it's hard and time-consuming, right? As it so often is in the case of right relationship and of covenant, because we're humans and we mess up and we have to come back and repair and make amends and continue to grow upon our relationship. One of our challenges, I suspect, for this fellowship as we continue to grow is that we continue to grow in ways that all can experience this year, right? Those who call many others here friends already, those who know just a few people, and those who aren't even here yet. Our community, too, we hope, will grow beyond these walls and to other communities and congregations we might work with to grow love and justice in our world. The call of community, the call of witness whose gaze is steady, must take us beyond those we are comfortable with, must take us into spaces of learning, growth, and love. For that is the closure of separation that will heal us. That is the reunification that will happen amongst community that provides that earthly here and now salvation. We find our salvation in community. It is what has saved us, and it is what will save us again and again. So may it be the love that heals us and opens other ways of relating to and loving one another. May it be the love that leads us to an ever-deepening reunion with ourselves, with one another, and the ground of our being, that interdependent web of life. May it be the love that leads us to beyond what we know, to heal the separation between us and those we don't yet know. Amen. May it be, and may we make it so.